about 5 years ago, we were working on a photo uploader. And we worked on what I considered to be a gorgeous UI. It was simple, it was easy, it allowed me to take a picture, and then I could upload that right away from wherever I was. And at the time, this was pretty groundbreaking, and I thought it was pretty cool. This picture for me is one of those that I took with that photo uploader and uploaded it to Flickr. This, for me, was a very poignant event in my life, because I took this picture and I used what I thought to be a brilliant UI, something that was simple and easy to use. And I took this picture of my daughter, and while I was filling out my UI to upload that photo, if you'll notice on the right-hand side of this photo, those are my other 2 children. They are headed on their way into the Royal Canadian Mint. And by the time I was finished with what I considered to be the brilliant UI, my family had left without me, and they had gone into the Mint. And they went in and said, "Where's Dad?" "Dad is outside playing with his BlackBerry." And that's one of a number of things that have been really profound to me in terms of just how different mobile is from all the other forms of user interface development, of software development that we've seen before. A lot of times, a lot of our traditional forms of user interface development is more of a, it's more centered around a PC model, which is profoundly different. A connected model. A lot of times when we're dealing with our PC or traditional forms of software development, we're thinking like this guy. This guy's a designer. This is a picture I took of a designer or an architect. And when you're in an office environment, you've got lots of time to consider things, to dwell on things, to look at things. But what's amazing to me, and this impacts our software development, our design processes too, is that in these types of environments, we have the time to consider, and we're looking at the user interface, and we're thinking about very carefully about how it works. But the reality is that our end users are running under a very different set of circumstances. In mobile, it's all about, mobile is about being efficient, quick, responsive, acting with certainty and forgiveness in the UI, because the environments in which we're using our mobile devices are far different than what they are on a desktop environment. Most of our users are operating in a mode like this guy. My device bothers me the most when I am trying to finish an email quickly before I leave to go out the door, before I get into my car. I'm trying to finish something quickly before the steward in the airline tells you to please turn that off, sir. I've told you once already. Time is very important. Clarity, focus. And so for me, in my experience, actually one more thing I'd like to share. This is a quick study we did, and it's really profound to me. This was a particular build of BlackBerry that we were using inside the company, and we took a look at how much you use your device based on your title. So if you were a designer or developer or research, if that was in your title, you use the device about 50 minutes per day. But then we looked at another class. We quickly took a look if you were a president, manager, or director. Now those people use their device significantly more, 85 minutes a day. But what was amazing to me is that like about 5% of those people use their device for like 5 hours a day. So we live in a world where our designers and developers, we have additional time to be able to think about our user interfaces, but our users are using the device a lot, and they interact with it in a number of areas where they expect it to be able to respond and just to work. So this is a use case we took we took a look at 2 people, 59,000 input events in a single day. 590 to 1,500 emails received, and 155 to 300 emails sent. This is the type of end user that BlackBerry has. These people use their devices, they live off them, they run their businesses. I have a friend of mine who's used his BlackBerry, and I think if you looked at his BlackBerry, you'd see his very fingerprints etched into the sides because it never leaves his hand. So the last, I gotta say, 3 years, I've had the opportunity to be able to speak at a number of different conferences on this. I've worked with a number of brilliant people, and we put together a lot of different content that we've developed over the years to help people to try to take their user interfaces and make them more efficient, make them more clear, make them more beautiful. So we took this, we had a lot of content trying to teach people how to take user interfaces that would look like this out of the box and turn them into something that worked a little bit better. What was very poignant for me, this was in DevCon Asia once. This is the culmination of, we had an opportunity to take all the best stuff that we have ever done in terms of frameworks, libraries, guides on designs and principles and things, and we baked that into a set of presentations, and we delivered that at DevCon Asia, and I thought that was really cool. Afterwards, I fielded a lot of questions, and I listened very carefully to what a lot of the developers were saying, and the questions they were asking afterwards. And they were asking very pointed and specific questions about how these things should work and how they would actually do this. And I sort of realized that a lot of the software developers, a lot of the people who were asking these questions didn't really want us to teach them how to do good design in their software. They just wanted it to happen. They wanted something that would do it for them. So they didn't have to think about the size of the buttons. The size of the buttons, or what font to use, or how to make it flow really fast, or how these design constraints. And so that reason for me is one of the reasons I am thrilled to be here today as part of BlackBerry 10. I'm thrilled that today, and at this conference, we have the opportunity to talk about BlackBerry 10 for the first time in past tense, because it's been delivered. We no longer have to talk about promises of it, but we now have a platform that's been delivered. And one of the best things, in my opinion, about BlackBerry 10 is that we have taken the opportunity to take all the things that we've learned about BlackBerry and to bake those into the platform. So, and this is one of the things that our UI frameworks do brilliantly, is that they take a lot of the learnings, a lot of the design, a lot of those things, and they built it, and performance, and build it into the platform, so that a lot of the content that we used to try to deliver and talk to developers about is no longer relevant, because it's just there. This is the slide for me that means the most about BlackBerry 10. This was made for me by a colleague at TAT. This is a conductor. And this conductor is attempting to conduct a symphony with a hot cup of coffee in his hand. Now you can see that if he was trying to conduct that symphony with a cup of coffee, that cup inhibits his flow. He has to be thinking about it. He has to be concentrating on it. He's not going to spill it. He doesn't want to burn himself. BlackBerry 10, by taking a lot of the design elements, the performance elements, and baking them into the platform, it takes the cup of coffee out of your hand. And so it's thrilling for me today to be here, to be able to speak to you about some design tenets with the very strong message, and this is built, that a lot of the design is built into the platform, so that actually increasingly on BlackBerry Classic, you had to think about design, and now on BlackBerry 10, it's largely about, like out of the box, your applications will already look good using a lot of the different controls. And then the opportunity is for now you think more about what your application needs to do, and not so much about what you have to do or design to be able to put in the software. And so the other awesome thing for me being here today is that I'm not just speaking about that, but with BlackBerry 10, there was BlackBerry took the real opportunity to be able to share these things, share BlackBerry early and share devices early. And so even though the platform has just been released, I'm here with Megan and Dan, and we together can share with you some of the things that the new tools make possible, and some examples that we've actually, from real life examples, for how we've already been, that Megan and Dan have been able to use in UI designs and in frameworks, and some of the things that are possible. So the three of us, I'm Gary Clausen. I'm a software architect with BlackBerry. I've been around for a long time. This is my third generation of BlackBerry, so I started on the 950, and anybody knows that, and then the Java platform, and this to me is the third generation of BlackBerry. And Megan, cool. Or I'll keep this.
Keep going. Yeah, sure. No, that's not a microphone.
Oh, no, you can.
Sure.
All right.
I'll press a button. Thank
Okay.
you. And my name is Megan Ranka, User Interaction Specialist with Macadamian, and overseeing all of the design that we're doing for all of the various BlackBerry 10 development that we're doing. I'll just go and then I'm going to hand it back to Gary.
So that's Megan, the Zorro figure.
That's right. You're Dan.
I'm Dan. I love BlackBerry. That's why there's a heart and a BlackBerry symbol. And what am I today? A technical lead? Okay. Hi.
So we partner with RIM to, we partner with BlackBerry to create some BlackBerry 10 apps that you may have already seen, and some new ones that will be coming. So we've been able to work even with the BlackBerry as the design patterns were evolving. We've been working with this platform for going on a year now.
Yep.
Yeah. So as things were being developed, we were continuing to work with the tools and massaging them, giving feedback, and so really understanding how to use these in a practical way.
Yeah, we started working with Cascades when it was 3.8, I think, and then they released 4, and that was the first Cascades. Before it was TML language. Yeah. So we really saw the evolution, and we had early access to all the goodies. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And how long have you been doing mobile UX design?
Since just around like Palm era.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Like just shortly after that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you want to talk a little bit about some of how the principles apply to.
Yeah, so actually, one thing we wanted to talk about is that a lot of the design principles, what I love is that one of the things that I love about the BB Jam shows is that a lot of the design, we shared the design, not only the controls, but also the design tenets that went into those controls. So there's a number of key things, and I think Megan's going to touch on them. But we just wanted the slide to be able to state and clarify that a lot of those design principles of flow and bringing your content forward, all the things that we've attempted, the design tenets that we use to design BlackBerry and that you can use in your own applications, really apply to any one of the runtime frameworks that run on BlackBerry 10. And BlackBerry 10 has a unique ability to be able to run any one of a number of different application frameworks. I've met some people who are writing their own development frameworks, and I just wanted to state that really the design tenets apply to anything, but also in a couple of them in particular. Cascades is, of course, like a native language. Like all of the design tenets have been specifically baked into the Cascades platform. And then also into WebWorks also follows a lot of those design principles. So although the design principles will apply to any one of those runtime frameworks, Cascades is really the manifestation of those design principles within controls, and it's a key way to be able to enable that and to use that. And so I think we'll probably be speaking primarily to Cascades as well as an example. But just a note to say that it really applies to any one of them. So the one thing, actually, this is a slide that Megan gave me. It's from a Macadamian blog. And it sort of shows, this is like a designer and a developer. And sort of, I love this slide. This speaks to my history. This speaks to what I know. There are really, a designer and developer are really often looking at the exact same problem from an entirely different perspective and using it in an entirely different language. In my experience, that creates some tension. And sometimes it's not a good tension and can cause contention. But there's something of, actually, I got to say, in my experience, a lot of the very best things that I have ever been a part of have come from a tension between those two perspectives. Somebody looking from it from a design aesthetic and working along with somebody with a technological point of view. And when those things work very well, then magic happens. And there's real opportunity there. And it's been an interest of mine how infrequently that tends to happen. The process that I've seen, a lot of times when I've seen it break down, the process that seems to be followed is you take a designer like Megan, who is working on something they want to envision, something that they want to be able to bring in. And so they will often, if you look at designers, they'll think about materials, they'll think about inspirations, they'll blue sky, they'll think about things that they want to create. They'll use rich tools, they'll use professional drawing tools, Photoshop tools, presentation tools, and they'll live inside their designs. And then they'll take all that rich study and understanding of what they want to be able to create, and they will take all of that rich, vibrant information and publish it into a paper document. There's always something interesting to me about those paper documents that get produced. Often, it seems the processes that we use, we take all that information, we put it into a paper document. Those paper documents, they often look really good. They look really good, especially on the when you put them on a great big screen like this and you show some of the screens, they can look really good. But a lot of the magic of a mobile interface, of the interaction, of the clarity, of how things move together, all the things that we know to be very important in terms of mobile design, in terms of mobile experience, somehow get lost when you take all of that rich information and you serialize it into a document and ship it off. So I work with a lot of developers. I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of different application teams, both inside and outside of RIM. And so a lot of times when the developer, somebody like Dan, gets that document, first thing that they often do is they look at the document and I've seen it where I've experienced this myself, and I've seen it a lot where you go, what? This doesn't make any sense. Sometimes, a lot of the times the reaction is, I don't think the designer understands how this code needs to work. And there's something missing here. And sometimes there's a barrier between those two people, either by time or space, and there's no opportunity to interact back and forth. And so, but they have no opportunity to communicate back, and the designer's and supposed to do what they say, so, all right, I'm going to publish some code. And so you take the spirit of what's in that paper document, and then you publish it, and then you send it back to your designer, and the designer, a little while later, gets to see the document, and then their initial reaction is, what? They don't know, what is that? That doesn't make any sense. We got a real problem here. And it's amazing to me how important that cycle is, and how invariably we seem to put processes in ourselves that sort of encourage a behavior that puts barriers between those two, and it makes that round trip take a long time. So, and really, I think the big thing to me is that there's a missed opportunity in that a lot of times the best ideas are the things that don't look like it at first. So if there is no opportunity, to be able to iterate and to be able to try things, then there's no opportunity for the designer to take risks, and there's no opportunity for the developer to take risks, and there's no opportunity for the magic that can happen from that. A lot of the things that I am most proud of being involved in BlackBerry Messenger, and the BlackBerry Splat included, came specifically from an interaction with a designer. The BlackBerry Splat was a discussion between designer and developer, where there was very big plans for what we wanted to be able to do that couldn't be possible in software, but we were able to come together and get something that actually worked. And it ended up being really successful.
So we should mention that
yeah.
just alone working with Cascades and designing for BB10 isn't necessarily going to fix the problem with a wand, but it does, because the design and just some of the beauty and the aesthetic of the design is baked right in. You can tell when you're working with it that there was somebody very early on who thought design was important, and so good design sort of bubbles up in every aspect. That's not going to necessarily tell you, how you should design your information architecture or what your user goals are going to be, but it is going to take those nice details that really make for a nice, smooth, fluid user experience, and they're just taken care of for you. So the flow that we were looking at there, it's not necessarily going to, if you have a wall between your designer and developer, working with cascades isn't necessarily going to break down that wall for you, but it is going to help improve the iterations that you do. Of course, the best is to not have the wall and to sit right beside each other and actually iterate on it.
Yeah. Actually, so this is something that intrigues me, and Megan and I were talking about this, but in my history, I've always, whenever I've worked with an interaction designer or a designer, I have tried to encourage them to be closer to the tools that we actually use inside the code. I spent a long time trying to get a designer to use SVG at the time, because SVG I thought was pretty straightforward. And the designer said, no, I can't do that. That's code. I can't work in that kind of format. And that's always intrigued me, because a lot of times these are designers who have figured out how to use tools like Photoshop, which to me is far more complicated than a lot of times the code. So this is something, what intrigues me, and I think when Megan and I were talking about this, there are a few things that have been evolving. Some very major things that have evolved in terms of the platform that BlackBerry 10 exposes, that while that can help break down the barriers between the two and help establish a richer form of collaboration between the design and developer, in order to shorten that gap, to make it easier for to be able to make it easier for the designer and the developer to be able to interact, to be able to do quicker cycles, and most importantly, to leave room for that magic. Because the best ideas don't look like it at first. You need the opportunity to be able to take risks and to try things, to be able to make mistakes, make lots of mistakes, and often that's where the magic is. And without that sort of iteration, if you have to formalize your idea before you have the opportunity to try it, a lot of times those best ideas won't get anywhere. So there's a rich opportunity here. Some of the key things, when I talked about enablers, some of the very key things in BlackBerry 10, the things that are evolving, the things that I expect to continue to improve over time, are things like a declarative UI. The ability to be able to, now in BlackBerry 10, you can drag and drop and you can create a UI directly within the framework tools, and that's in QML. And while it used to be the round trip cycle time, even for a developer, to be able to take a new design or a new change to the UI and put that on top of existing code, meant at least recompiling the code, making the code changes, recompiling it, and putting it on the device. What I've seen happen in a lot of teams at RIM, the application development teams that are the most nimble, the most responsive, have formatted their code such that there's an underlying data service layer, and they are leveraging QML. And when you leverage QML, that gives you the ability not only to be able to create a QML document, but to share that QML document, but also to, all you have to do if you want to make an update to your UI is to change the QML. You actually connect to the application and just change the QML, and the round trip times are much quicker. It gives you the opportunity to be able to take your design and make changes and to live with them a little bit. It gives you the chance to make quicker changes and to try it, to iterate back and forth much more quickly. And some other enablers, and Megan has practical examples of this too, but the rich set of controls that Megan mentioned too, it gives a common, because the design and the layout in the controls, a lot of thought has been put into that. Though that set of controls builds sort of a common framework, a common language that can be used in order to be able to facilitate and so you can start thinking about the application and what you're trying to do, rather than hopefully less about fonts and color and everything else, and more about the interaction and what you're trying to do with it. And of course, the built-in UI, UX and design And this is a key thing. This is a poignant thing for me, but high-resolution, vibrant displays. We did a lot of speaking in the past on how to resize assets, resize parts of your screen, dealing with different form factors. A real game changer over the industry the last little while is that we now have high-resolution displays, so and OpenGL and vibrant full color, which means that a lot of time, like, there's less compromise, there's less thinking about what color reductions you're going to do or how you're going to resize images, and largely images that look good, they will look good on a variety of different devices. And it's poignant for me because it takes a whole raft of design and graphics changes right off the table, because you don't have to think about them as much anymore. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that. I'll hand you over the clicker so you can continue
examples,
and make
maybe.
it real.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary. Which one do I have? There we go. So I think everybody, it's a fairly familiar quote, but it is still poignant to mention that, you know, a lot of the little elements of design you really don't have to think about. So you can, as Gary said, focus on the user goals, focus on the complicated stuff to ensure that the users are actually able to complete what they set out to do, to use it both effectively and efficiently, whatever it is, the app that you're going to do. So what I wanted to show you a little bit of are some practical examples that we've done to show you how to apply some of the design patterns. They're not necessarily terribly complex, and they're in various forms of prototypes, but it's just an interesting way to see, okay, what does this design pattern mean? When I go onto the guidelines and it says something like, you know, cinematic experience, well, what does that mean for this neat tool that I'm building or this experience that I'm building? So that's really what I want to talk about. So when you go to the design patterns guideline, you'll see that beyond things like layout and custom controls and the various tools that you need to use on your screen, there are more macro type of design patterns. And they're listed here. We have the link, but I'm sure you're all quite familiar with them at this point. So what I wanted to do was just take a couple of these and walk through what, you know, one way of applying this design pattern into something in the real world. So what does it mean when we say BlackBerry Flow? BlackBerry Flow, you've probably heard multiple times in the past day or two or weeks leading up to the launch. So the idea that, you know, in a nutshell, it just keeps the momentum going. Remove stuff that you don't need so that you can accomplish the thing that you set out to do. So things like, it might help to predict your behavior, but in general, it might do little things like help customize your menus. Ultimately, to help people connect and to keep the communication at its core, of course, which we're going to get to in a second. So what does that mean? That's a lot of sort of high-level kind of stuff. How does it translate into the real world? So this is a mock-up from on the older OS, the conference application. So for previous BlackBerry Jams, we designed a little application that would allow you to register, check the sessions, read speaker bios, that kind of thing. And because of the way that the information was laid out, there was this discrepancy between the general agenda of everything that was happening and then my agenda. And there was no clear link other than the words and the fact that you would assume that you would figure this out. But there's just sort of that disconnect between how you're organizing your time. So how do you improve this user experience flow? There we go. Is the segmented controls that you have available to you, now you can actually see the relationship between the general agenda and the things that are important to me and understand the relationship between those two. So it's just it's a very small example, but it's just a way of helping the user to connect with what they need to, see what makes sense to them without other stuff getting in the way, without you forcing the user to come to their own conclusions. You can use nice little custom controls, or sorry, it's not custom, a native control to help organize your information, and present it to the user so they don't have to think about it. And actually, an interesting point was that we were talking about you can apply these design patterns, of course, to any runtime. That was done in WebWorks. We're going to look at another one from Cascades, but those are a practical example of you can actually use, of course, and apply these design patterns into whatever runtime you're using. So what does it mean when we say content is king? Is to remove all of the extra stuff and let the user see what they need to. So for example, get rid of the Chrome, get rid of the affordance, get rid of all of the extra stuff that tells the user what you think that they should know about. The affordance of navigation, the affordance of what comes next, you get from actually physically picking it up and interacting with the device. So just remove all of the extra stuff except that there's content. So what does that mean? Again, it's sort of at a high level. What does that mean in a practical example? It's little things like the list control. The list control, each line item is fully selectable. There's no extra action buttons. There's no affordance here for what you can do with a list item. But the affordance comes when you physically pick up the device and you start to play with it, and then you see where you need to go. So it's another way of translating, when you're talking about translating what's on the desktop to the mobile, you don't need to have a button on the side that says add, because you don't need that affordance on a mobile device where on the desktop you do. So helping the user to focus on the content, bring it to the top, let that shine, and get rid of all of the extra stuff you don't need. So if you want the action, if you want to see what you can do, once you start to interact with it, now you see what's next. So little things as well, how you lay out your screen. So for example, and at this point you're getting quite familiar with them, but the main action items over on the side, or over on the bottom, the main tabs, you don't need to see the entire information architecture whenever you launch the app, but you can access it at any time. So there's the collapsed state and the expanded state. And then, of course, you can see that the tabs along the bottom, the main part of the action, and they are redundant on the side, so you can see the rest of the menu, the overflow menu. So that was the conference app that was built for this conference, and that was done in WebWorks. This is an example now that I'm going to show you. It was an exercise that we did to understand the design patterns of BB10 before the launch. So we took an app that was a Windows 8 app that we built just called Talks, and organizing various talks and speakers that you can take a look at. And then we ported it over to BlackBerry 10 to try out practical examples of how to apply the design patterns. So that's my intro to say we want to talk about communication at its core again, and what does that mean to have a cinematic experience. So I'll take you through an example that will sort of show you how to apply both of those design patterns. So in the Talks app, once you've, in the BlackBerry 10 version, if you've selected a talk to take a look at this video, there's John Hodgman talking about design. And there is the example, and there are the controls, but once you've been watching this for a few seconds, those fade away. You don't need to have them. The content here is what is king. You bring it up to the center and let the user focus on what they want to do. Of course, translating it into landscape allows for an efficient ergonomics use of the device. But let's say, here I'm talking about you don't need to have the affordance there, because when you pick up the device and you start to interact with it, that's when you see the navigation come through. So you can pick it up and your controls come back. Because when you're watching it, you're simply not interacting with it. You're more in a passive state. Once you're in an active state, you're probably looking to do some actions. So when you pick it up, it fades in again, and you can interact with the menu. If you swipe up, you scroll more to see more of the bio. Sorry, Dan. I jumped into the slide. So they're just some small examples of how to apply the design patterns to every day. Everything is, of course, needs to be taken within its context, but to see what that means is to take these sort of high-level, flowery words and then translate them into something like, what does that mean for me? I'm hoping that some of these practical examples will help to understand how you can take these design patterns and make them real. So I'm going to hand it over to Dan. Do you need to?
Thank you. So today what I want to talk about is transitions and animations. Why only this? Because as Megan mentioned, most of the rest is already, you get it for free. So the way I'm going to do this is by showing you a little app that I worked with one of the BlackBerry employees. We took the Weather Guesser app, it's a sample app, and we transformed it to a history app. And really everything was just there. And I want to show you the app. So how do I do this? HDMI. Okay. So see, in this app, we already have like the pretty title bar, the action bar at the bottom, everything that Megan mentioned, that was already there. I didn't really have anything to do. And I was able to focus on adding other fun stuff to the app. And transitions and animations are really my favorite thing, that the favorite feature in Cascades that I can use quickly to just make something prettier. And we can go through this app and see what we could improve. So I'll just start it back, and so pay attention. When it starts, you go from a blue screen right to the loading activity indicator and the list, and they just like kind of pop up there immediately. One of my favorite improvements that I add to everything that I can is making things fade in, and I think you mentioned that too in your cinematic experience, right? So I'm going to show you how we could do that for this page. And these lists as well, they have kind of the same principle here, where they just go from activity indicator to poof, you get a list. And maybe something else that we could do is, just to show you some of the code on how to create transition and animations, is maybe we can animate some of these things that you see on the info screen. Now, clicker. What am I seeing now? All right. So, like I said, the initial page could fade in, the activity indicator could fade in and out, the list items as well. There's more things I wrote down if you want to take a look at the app after the presentation. But I'm going to just do a few of these because we don't have time to go into more. So fading in, how can we do this, and where should we do this? As I mentioned, I'm only going to apply it where it makes sense, and that's where I'm switching. I'm already on a page, and I'm switching from some state, which is the activity indicator working, and to the list appearing, or maybe the error message popping up. I'm not switching, I'm not navigating in this case, so I want to have that smoothness in the page, right? So let me just move my slide. How can we do this? I'll just show you the code quickly. It's actually quite simple to do that, and this is one of the fun things with Cascades. So this is the diff for my continent cities page. That's where you saw the list of cities for a continent. I'm sorry, I can't go through the QML on how to create that page right now, but I'm just going to show you how easy it was to make the list view fade in. All I did is I initially set it to not be visible, and I attached a fade transition to it of a duration of like 1 second that will transition it from 0 opacity to 1 with this curve. And whenever the data model changes, when an item is added, I'm going to add that, to play that animation so it will come up smoothly. Same for the weather page. The weather page is where you saw all the weather history items. I attached the same transition to that. It takes 1 second and makes it visible. So I'm going to build that and load it on the device and show you the difference. So can you see that? When it came up, it was just much smoother now. And I'll drill down to another city to show you. See this one too, the lists for the continent. It now comes up smoothly. And when I drill down to a city, same thing, it's smooth now. And that was like a few lines of code. Super easy. I applied it as well to the error message, which I have a problematic city here. And see, it was smooth. It came up smoothly. And just with a few lines of code. I put a link there to the list of stock curves that you get. I use the cubic in, I believe, or cubic out. My colleague here, Gary, suggests that we use the ease in curve. Is that what you said?
Quadratic out.
Quadratic out.
We used to play a lot with animation curves, and there's a lot of different choices and stuff that you can use. I believe, and there's implicit animations in Cascades. To me, the quadratic out, like Dan was saying too, there's some cases where you want to use a very specific animation, but what I like about quadratic out is that one is that it matches physics, because that's how, like, it's the same Newtonian physics, so it's like a page got thrown in. It matches that physical model. The other neat thing about like a quadratic out is that it comes in very fast and then it slows down, which means that halfway when the animation's done, it's more than halfway complete. So it comes in very quick. You can see the content quickly, and then it slows down at the end, which means that you can actually start to see what content is there when you're appearing new content. So actually a lot of the implicit animations, a lot of the transitions, if you click on an email and you open it, it uses that quadratic animation and it has that visual effect. It's actually a lot faster because you can actually start to see the content and figure it out before the animation's even complete, which is pretty cool, I think.
And you just mentioned implicit animations. This is something I forgot to mention, that almost everything, all the properties in Cascades are animated by default. They have a default transition. In this case, if I would have just simply set the opacity from 0 to 1 with one line of code, it would have transitioned it smoothly with the curve that you mentioned. Yeah. In my case, I found that it was a bit too slow. That's why I made my own explicit animation, and I set it to 1 second. I thought, and especially for this example to show you, it was much easier to do that. But by default, it'll do it on its own.
It's sort of a good example. If you want to put the level of design and detail in the animation curves and how things appear at that subtle level of detail, you can do it. Or you can leave it to somebody who's already tuned it for the implicit animations and put a lot of thought into those curves and how things should appear. So,
the other thing I wanted to show you is the info page. So with a few lines of code, I created an animated sky. See? So I'll show you the code for that. It's quite simple. So what I did is first of all, I got rid of the old cloud that was there. It was a static image. I wrapped 4 new clouds, 4 image views in a container, and I positioned them, I changed them, translated them on the y-axis just so they're a bit one above the other. And I attached a series of animations, transitions here, translate transitions for each of the clouds. So, and what I said is I want to move them on the x-axis from like cloud A, for example, from -455 to 1300, and similarly for the other ones. And I made all the durations a bit different, the curves as well, so they appear like they're moving with the wind. And I wrapped them all in a parallel animation, which just starts them all at the same time and then lets them do their thing. And I set the repeat count forever, so that just keeps the sky moving. And when the page loads, I play the animation, and that's it. It was just this block of code doing all of that.
Great.
Are we there? See? That's it. That's my...
So we'd like to open it up to questions. If anyone has a question, we have a floor mic so that it gets captured on the audio feed.
And I got to say that speaking to Dan and Megan preparing for this, Megan and Dan have a whole lot more experience than may have come through. It's a large topic, so they've been dealing with a lot of the practical issues and doing design and everything else. So if there's any questions or things you want to ask now or afterwards, it'd be a good opportunity to.
Feel free to stop us in the hall if you have a design problem that's sort of nagging you, or just want to run some stuff by. Often when you're working on a design problem, the most common answer is, well, it depends. And so every implementation of a design pattern has to consider the context, has to consider the user goals, and needs to be sort of massaged to fit your particular question. You do have a question.
Hello, I don't know if I'm on the same topic with you, because we're doing games mostly.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to ask a technical question of how do you handle animations that use transparency, like shadow drops, etc., so to optimize on these devices. Because we have in some cases we have some, I don't know, maybe custom transitions from screen to screen, and all have to be different depending on the theme of the game, of course. And we sometimes experience performance issues, so we have some methods of solving them, but I just wanted to ask how maybe you do it, if you have some experience with it.
Yeah, that would be a fun question for me to answer, actually. Can I ask, are you using OpenGL?
We're using cross-platform development with Unity and Adobe Air.
Okay. So while I'm not I don't know about the application framework. I don't know what, I'd love to ask you about like what specific performance problems you're having. Like, is it stutter? Yeah, okay, actually, so I'll speak generally too. And this would be a good opportunity. I had the opportunity to work directly with the
We can plug it in
team.
if we want to show it. He doesn't mind.
But
This is not optimized, it's just ported. So we did these 20 games for the portal from. So once you start adding transitions, they are using generic transitions.
okay.
Not generic transitions, I mean custom transitions with...
I'll speak to it just in general terms. Like just to, it's amazing to me how much, actually some amazing work went into Cascades in order to make those animations smooth. A lot of it, the trick to making anything smooth, liquid graphics, I'm going to be speaking on this a little bit more in another session at 12:45, but you've got, the screen updates 60 times per second. So in order to be smooth, you have to draw once and only once to that LCD in order to appear smooth. But not only that, your animation timers need to be synchronized to that VSync. Because when you're using high resolution content, and when something's moving, if you miss even a single frame at 60 frames per second, the user notices. So a lot of times that software developers, OpenGL platforms, they speak in terms of frames per second. I personally kind of hate that, and I don't think it adds a lot of information. The reality is you need to hit every frame. It's pass-fail. You need to hit 60 frames per second, or if you miss, it shows up as a stutter. In order to hit 60 frames per second, it varies in terms of heat too. So if you sync yourself to the graphics pipeline and sync your animation timers to that graphics pipeline as well, and then make sure that your CPU operates within 16 milliseconds within its budget, and the GPU operations happen within their budget, and then composition of multiple overlapping windows also are within their budget, then everything is smooth. Cascades does that very well. And not only that, it's been optimized. Early in the development cycle, we did have some issues with stutter for complicated scenes. But actually, in preparing for this conference, I got to say, for a lab that we're doing this afternoon, we attempted to reproduce a scenario that actually caused stutter, a performance problems in a Cascades list. And it took 4 or 5 people working together to try to find a scenario that could make it stutter and make it stall. So I know that that's sort of an overview of how Cascades ensures that its animations are smooth. That's also the level of detail you need to put into your animations in order to make them smooth. A lot of frameworks, a lot of OpenGL platforms, they'll know this and they'll do this. They'll be synced to the graphics pipeline and they'll perform that really well. If you're having issues with stutter, it's a matter of making sure all those things are happening, and then you'll be able to eliminate that. But it's just an overview. I don't know. We can talk afterwards if you'd like to.
Hi.
Hi.
I'd like to ask the designer something. Imagine a situation where a developer develops the whole application without any knowledge or any input from
I can't imagine that.
It's possible.
Okay.
I'm not developing myself. So what would be like the main mistakes, or what would be the main points that could be improved by the developer himself without any input from a professional designer? Like what are the major mistakes that the developers do?
I love that question. I'll let Megan answer.
The beauty with Cascades is that they gave you a direction, and for the flow and the tabs and everything, you get all that for free.
Yeah. So I guess my answer is, if you're designing for the BB10, the good news is a lot of little things. It's for the enterprises, the application. Mm-hmm. Okay. So some of the little things that make for a nice, rich, sort of fluid user experience, Cascades has already thought of. So unfortunately, the problems that would continue would be of more structural issues about maybe the information architecture or not really understanding the user's goals. So it might the flow of trying to complete that goal, it might be a little bit backwards. But the nice thing, in fact, the lovely thing about building with Cascades and using any of the design patterns for various runtimes is those little nice things that are the low-hanging fruit of quick and easy things. You don't really have to think about them. They're already there. They come baked in. They're there by default. So unfortunately, the problems then become bigger. So.
And one good thing about Cascades is that it has the declarative UI. So personally, I think it's easier to reorganize an application if we're just changing the QML. And even if the developer split it up in pages and then you want to reorganize the flow or something, that's quite easy as well.
I say there's a thing that I like your question because we used to engage designers that way. Speaking as a developer, we used to, a lot of times you talk to the designers or the graphics designers and they're too busy. They'll schedule in sometime. And the best way to engage the developers we found was that's fine, it's okay. We've done our own design and we think it's pretty good. So we're just going to ship it the way it is. And that's when you get the designers engaged, because wait, hang on just a minute. And then they'll actually...
Threaten.
Yeah.
Threats. Yeah, threats
So if you
work
want to
really well
engage a
too.
designer, just do it yourself and then see what they think. We were talking about this last night. I'm intrigued by the notion that, and this is sort of revealed too, if you listen to designers, if you sit down like I did last night with some people from Sweden, and you listen to the designers, and the subject of fonts came up, and you realize that there is a lot of detail that comes into font selection. If you talk to the people who do it, there's a lot of detail there. If you talk about animation curves, there's a lot of detail there. There's a lot that developers take for granted in terms of aesthetics, design, clarity of focus. And I gotta say, the one encouragement that I'd have is that, and sort of speak, like, the animation curves is the one thing. Know that thought has been put into the animation curves that are there. If you're a designer and there are areas that, where you're not confident, if you don't know a lot about fonts or color, don't change those things. Leave them alone. Let the framework do what it does very well. And don't try to second guess the decisions that are in there. If you don't know and understand animation curves, just go. We joked in the past, and I think about there should be you should be ability always to change colors and fonts and everything else. But we thought it should have a separate signing key that you have to be qualified by somebody like Megan. Yeah, you have to certify that you understand what a serif is and why they do and do not exist before you're allowed to select the font. I wish that PowerPoint had such a guideline.
We're probably coming to the end of
Yeah,
our time
we're
here.
flashing
We're
red
going
here.
over
Look at
time.
this, people.
So if you, like I said, see us in the hall or wherever, stop, ask questions. We're happy to answer anything remaining. Thanks for attending.
Thank you. It's going to blow up. Look at this.